There we go. We finally made it. We are live. So, before we get into things, I have an opening video that I actually recorded earlier today that I'm going to run real quick. And then we'll get into some conversation with you, Ryan. Hi, guys. I'm Liam Graff, and this is our first episode of Choreography Insights and Interviews. Today I'm going to be interviewing Ryan Jolicoeur-Nye, and we're going to be talking about primarily improvisation and its use in choreography. So what I'm going to do for just a minute here is I'm going to talk with you about what exactly we are thinking about as we do improvisation. So I'm going to talk about a couple of exercises and things that are kind of trigger points to make movement and to make it easier to continually make new movement. The first one of those is going to be your basic motor improvisation. So that being, if you're going to think about the range of motion that you can reach with your hand and your wrist, and then your elbow, and think about all of the ways that you can utilize every part of your body to create something and to create a different visual. In addition to that, just seeing how that feels. And a lot of the movement that I personally generate comes directly from that, just exploring what my body is capable of. Now, if we jump into something just a little different, there's what I would call a singular directive improvisation. So that's where one part of your body is going to direct the rest of your body. So I'm going to use my hand for an example. And let's just try a few things. So what I'm doing is I'm driving all the movement with this right hand here, and I am allowing myself to kind of follow that where it takes me. And if I continue along that path, it can continue to develop, especially if I'm in a little larger space where I can't touch the walls behind me while staying in frame. So with the lack of space, we can get into an additional element of improvisation, and that is improvisation with limitation. So right now we're working with very minimal space. And that means that I need to work within the minimal confines that I have and make interesting shapes and think about how I can utilize the space around me even though it's smaller than I would normally want it to be. And that might mean tracing the wall. It might mean actually using the wall. It can mean a lot of different things. One of my favorite ways to improv is contact improv, and that's taking information and motivation from another person and then transferring their energy through your own body to generate movement. Unfortunately, given current circumstances, I can't really give you an example of that, but you can imagine what that would look like. It's very similar to what I was doing earlier with taking energy from my hand and following that energy, but add another person and another brain. And that's a part of why we have all these little directives for improvisation, is so if we are doing something like contact improv, then we can, without speaking, have kind of this language start to build and start to form where we're more or less on the same page. think like in a basketball game where you're going to have a lot of different set plays, but then you're not running that play in exactly the way you thought you were going to every single time. So there's little manipulations and additions that happen to make things work consistently. So one of those things being taking and giving energy, one of those things being having a similar directive. We can also do something like running energy through and around our bodies. So if you say, I'm going to improv and all of the energy has to cross my center line as I'm moving, then you have a very specific way that you're going to be moving. And if you were to put several people on stage and give them that same directive, you would probably get something that's rather cohesive. So in a couple of minutes, I'm going to get Ryan on the phone, well, rather on Skype so that you guys can see him. And we're going to talk for a little bit about his choreography and how he utilizes improvisation in his process, whether it's generating choreography or actually putting physical improv on stage.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. There we go.
This is all improvisation, clearly. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, what is the largest way that you use improvisation in your current process? So if you're going to be creating a new work, where is improvisation likely to fit into that?
My process is different every time I make a work. Improv is something relatively new that I've started using, and I use it in varying ways. It depends on the dancers, really, that I'm utilizing. If I'm creating a piece on dancers that I've never worked with before, it is really helpful to, one, give some guided improv, or at least some element of a guided improv, with some like the directives that you were talking about. Sometimes I'll put on some music and have people move and say, imagine you're moving through the mud, or think about circles, or think about your hands painting the sky. And get an idea of how they feel music and who they are as an artist, how they interpret movement. But then if I'm going to put improv on stage, I really already have to know that dancer, and I have to trust that dancer. I think there's a lot of trust when you're creating an artistic product, and you allow an artist to go out and create something completely new every time. So it kind of varies how I use it.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to be trusted in that. In the very first piece you actually set on me, you gave me a pretty solid chunk of improv to work with several directives. And that was a really cool, fun process. That was actually my first time improvising on stage. So I was a little bit nervous that first time. That I had actually only become recently comfortable with improvisation as well.
Sure. Well, that's great. No, I find that it is with dancers, improv is a very vulnerable experience. Dancers are typically they're the artist, but more so dancers are the paintbrush.
Hmm. I
They're
absolutely agree.
the paint. So they're directed on what to do. And surprisingly, a lot of dancers don't feel comfortable giving choreographers information that comes from themselves. They need to be told exactly what to do, especially younger dancers.
Hmm.
So it's a very vulnerable experience, and it does take some practice and it takes quite a bit of courage to put improv on stage.
So, when you are preparing to put improv on stage, what are the things that you are working on and trying to develop with the dancer to put together what is, at the very least, a cohesive performance on stage?
Right. So rehearsal obviously comes into play. And what I found, I have only probably put improv on stage maybe four times in the 10 years that I've been choreographing. But rehearsal obviously comes into play because dancers begin to have this sense of muscle memory. I'll give you an example. One of the ballets, one of my first ballets, I did this season on the company. It was called Immortal Beloved, and we have a wonderful dancer that's a resident guest artist, Blake Wendy. Um, he is somebody that I have come to really trust in his movement. But he's also way outside of my wheelhouse in how I move and my choreographic style. Now we work well together because we feel music in the same way. He's incredibly musical, but I feel like if I were to pinpoint exact steps and confine him into my realm of choreography, I am limiting what the audience is going to see,
Mm-hmm.
rather than if I give him some feeling and directive and let him kind of run free as the artist that he is. Uh, does that make sense?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And actually, we have the video that you sent me, and we can actually, I think that'll give a little bit more context as to what exactly you're talking about as far as that kind of trust. Because what he ended up creating with what you gave him was absolutely stunning.
Yes.
So, we can play the video again and maybe talk about some of those directives that you gave him and those landmarks. Because I remember there were a lot of landmarks as we were going through the process where you gave him very specific instruction on how you wanted the dynamics of the music to influence his movement.
Right. I typically do that. Now when I choreograph, my primary focus, or generally the most important thing to me, unless I have a story to tell, is representing the music. Um, and I love this idea of being able to see the music in a dancer's body. And that's something that Blake, in this piece especially, embodied really well. Um, the idea was to have it look like he was playing the piano. Um, and how Beethoven, having been deaf or going deaf, would have had to listen to vibrations and pound a rhythm into the side, bang on the side of the piano, uh, and really get it the rhythm and the idea of what he was trying to create when he composed this music into his body. So to me, that was the perfect relationship, the perfect blend. Was Beethoven needing to have this music in his body when he made it because he couldn't hear it, and also having Blake have this music and show represent it with his body.
So I guess a good follow up to that would be when you start working on a piece like this, how much time do you end up spending on just doing research to really get a solid background of the material you're working with?
Uh, that really depends. My choreographic process now is very on the fly. When I first started choreographing, I would come in with a notebook full of specific steps written down that each dancer would execute. I would say, you're going to take your right hand and you're going to put it on their left shoulder, and then they're going to turn with the head. And what I found was not only did I have to then go back and decipher my own writing when you're on the spot in front of a room full of dancers, but then also the dancers had to interpret something that had no. Um, and I had just created something that was the dancers in my head, or something that and it virtually had nothing to do with the artist that I was working with in the room. So it was very hindering. And now I literally make no plan. So when I'm creating a piece, typically I sometimes I don't even know the music before I walk in the room. And that to me is exciting, and it allows for something just totally to be born in the moment. But with Immortal Beloved, I wanted this piece to be about Beethoven and somewhat representative of aspects of his life. Um, and so I did do some research on his past to help me understand a bit more about his music and who he was as a person and as a composer.
Okay. I just totally lost my train of thought. I had a really great follow up for that one. But
Oh no,
since I lost my train of thought, I guess we can move on a little bit.
sure.
Um, so when you are working on a piece, would you say that your style morphs more to the dancers than the dancers to your style? Or is it kind of more of a middle ground?
I think you're exactly right with that last one. It is a middle ground. Um, what I feel like my job is to create a concept and then put that concept on the dancers. And this is partially why I don't like restaging work, because when you have different artists, you get a different result. And I'm okay with a different result, but then the process has to be different. So the thing that I really try to focus on is the concept and the musicality. And then I give that to the dancers and I help them shape their own interpretation of movement. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't let the dancers, uh, typically, unless I'm giving them improv on stage, I don't let them typically choreograph the work. I've worked with choreographers that will allow me to choreograph an entire piece, um,
Yeah.
and then put it on stage. I don't go quite that far. I am all about collaboration because I think that, if we're referring to dancers as paints or paintbrushes, that everyone is different. Every dancer is different and special. So I try to pick up on that essence of that dancer and then walk with them down the pathway of creating this work. Uh, my job then, once I give them materials, to sit back and to push that material in a way that aligns with my taste and my concept and my interpretation of the music, if that makes sense. So I look at a dancer doing a step that we have just decided on, and I figure out ways that I can help them expand their movement, expand how they see themselves in the movement, and expand, I guess, what the body can actually uh, uh, go beyond what they think their limit is.
I would say that I've certainly seen my own my own movement pushed with your choreography. That feeling comfortable in your choreography is by and large not the primary thing I would point out. That by the time we're going to stage, of course, I'm comfortable with the movement, but I always feel that little push from behind to expand and to keep going with the movement.
Yes, I love risk and I love big movement. I think that dance is an endless. It's endless what you can do in creating movement and what the body has the ability to move.
So, when you shifted from being primarily a choreographer to now being a director and choreographer, what changed in your choreography, or is there anything that you would say there's a drastic difference now versus before you became a director?
Well, when I was just freelance choreographing, obviously the work was a lot less consistent, and so I was given time to um, think on the concept of what I would like to create. Uh, I was sort of more free to create what I felt I was inspired by at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Becoming an artistic director, you need to execute a season. And with a smaller organization, though we do bring in guest choreographers, I did a lot of the work also.
Yeah, you
Um, it's
choreographed
more,
multiple hours of choreography this past season.
yes, and the work has to be diverse because the community and dance requires diverse work, right? The company doesn't want to do the same thing over and over, right? So going from choreographing Immortal Beloved to Nutcracker to Cinderella, um, to ballet with rock and dance outside, dance on a stage, dance in the studio. It all has to be different. And I think that the challenge for me in being an artistic director and choreographing so much work is that I need to I need to get it out, whether I'm inspired or not.
Mm-hmm. Like you just have to push and keep giving
You have
choreography.
to. But the good thing about that, a very good friend of mine um, once told me that his name is Victor Plotnikov, who's been a choreographer for a long time and somebody that I have admired and shaped myself. His work really inspired me when I was a dancer. He said, if you're not making crap, then you're not making enough work. And that really stuck with me because I always felt like as an artist, I needed my work to be better and better each time.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, don't worry about that. Just make work. And the more work you make, some of it's going to be not good. Some of it's going to be, but it'll all shape you as a choreographer. And this is great because it pushes the boundary of dance. Dance has to evolve. And that helps push that boundary. Um, And so the companies are taking risks, choreographers are taking risks, dancers are taking risks, and we're not just consistently repeating this tapestry of the same work recycled from company to
Hmm.
company. So it's nice that I was forced to push through work, even if I wasn't feeling particularly inspired. Um, so it's been a challenge, but a welcome challenge.
I would certainly say so. And it's been very interesting seeing the vast diversity that you have managed to create this season. That even the two classical reps this season, Nutcracker and Cinderella, were incredibly different. That there's kind of a similar through line of your sense of humor to an extent, but the rest of the styling is entirely different.
Yeah, I try. It's challenging for choreographers to not to have, like you said, a common thread in what their voice is, but not create the same work over and over and over again, which challenged me. I mean, last season I did a Beatles ballet in sneakers, and I
Mm-hmm.
had never done movement like that. I didn't know if I would be able to, and the end result, I was so happy with it. Um, and so I find that when I challenge myself to go outside of my go-to movement, which if I had my go-to choice every time, it'd be some beautiful, slow, sappy violin music to some pas de deux work.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it's nice to be challenged and to keep my voice, but expand what that voice is.
So, for you as a choreographer, do you think there's a wrong way to utilize improv on stage or in the choreographic process? Do you think there's a more or less disingenuous way to utilize improv?
I do. I don't want to be too judgmental of different choreographers' processes because everybody's different.
Of course.
Some people utilize, I've worked with choreographers that will create an hour and a half of material for a 10-minute piece. I even worked with a choreographer once that created material, went home, took the video of all of the material that he created on us, and cut and spliced it into a cohesive video uh, of movement that was not placed together, and then brought it into the studio and said, "Here's the piece." And we two weeks worth of workshopping to see this piece come together via video. It was astounding. I've never seen anybody do that before, and the product was beautiful. But to answer your question, I think in the same way that I could not go on YouTube as a choreographer, go on YouTube and lift someone else's choreography, put my name on it, put it on dancers, and put it on stage. Uh, I feel like I also would not want to do that to a dancer. I would not want to, um, improv is one thing, but allowing a dancer to create or a group of dancers to create entire bodies of work, and then just giving them some direction in it, I think is a little bit infringing. It crosses that line to kind of infringing on the dancer's own creative.
Mm-hmm. So,
Um,
in that situation, do you think that I've seen several times choreographers write in the choreographic credits, choreographed in collaboration with dancers or with a said company. Do you think that is a reasonable um, kind of way to work around that is more or less ethical in the handling of that?
well, I do. I think as long as all the parties know and everybody's in agreement on the creative process, I think that really anything goes. Maybe dancers want to be that involved in the creative process. I know that I love to collaborate with dancers, um, but I also have kind of a pretty clear idea of what I want to get out of it.
Hmm.
So, for instance, I would not have you go into a corner, create a pas de deux, come out of that corner, have me film it, and then take it home and create my pas de deux around the pas de deux that you just created,
Hmm.
which is the way that I have seen it done. Um, Now, you very much get the dancer's voice in that, which always I think makes an artist look better. Um, but that's not something that's not a part of my process. It's not something that I would do. Uh, but I think as long as the dancers and the choreographer and whoever's working together in the room understand the process and they're enjoying the process, I think all's fair.
Makes sense to me, and I, for the most part, personally, am up for pretty much any process. That whatever the choreographer does to get the best possible product, I'm typically up for that. And even if that reaches to the extent of me creating a chunk, provided it's not me generating 2 minutes of movement on my own, there's a point where it becomes unreasonable, of course, but um, I appreciate all of the different processes that I've had the privilege of being a part of. And they've kind of informed how I like to choreograph a little bit myself.
Yes. I think, Leo, what you said about the choreographer getting the best possible outcome, I've only ever, aside from, what little improv I've given here and there, the improv that I gave with Blake, and I did it one other time with a dancer that was a second company dancer in Kansas City Ballet. Uh, I created a work on them, and the piece was granted, Austin is a beautiful mover no matter what you give him. But the piece didn't showcase who he was. And I really wanted to do that. I wanted all of the dancers to be showcased. So I gave him a moment in the music that was just for him to create. And he improvised. And part of the reason that I did that was because I didn't think that I had the choreographic ability in my style of choreography to not hold him back. To get the best possible outcome out of him, I had to let him go
Hmm.
and do it on his own.
So it's
Uh,
kind of a similar philosophy to what you hold with Blake.
right. And I felt the same way with Blake. I I'm intimidated by the fact that I don't know that I could get as beautiful movement out of him as he creates himself.
Yeah, his ability to create is absolutely beyond me.
Right. Right. And it's something really stunning to watch. And it he has and Austin have both really given me a lot of insight to myself as a choreographer, and I've learned that from working with both of them. So it's been both of those instances where I utilized a lot of improv. It was rewarding for me, and I think was the most rewarding thing I could have done for those dancers too.
So if you were to look at all the different things that Blake did over the course of that piece, we could talk about just the improv Blake did during that piece for an hour.
Right.
If we had a video of every single time he did it, there is only very small portions that you could look at and would be identifiably the same. And
Mhm.
the outcome every single time was stunning.
Right.
And I think that is a part of the beauty of improv, especially for somebody that is that skilled in improv.
Yes. And I really had to trust Blake a lot because not only did he have this segment of improv where he was by himself on the stage, but he had improv when there were 12 other dancers dancing around him that had choreography. So I had to really trust him to feed off of those dancers' movement,
Hmm.
um, and also to make good choices. That ballet was about 25 minutes long,
Yeah.
and I had to trust him a lot to make good choices because I had an entire company of dancers, 20 plus dancers on stage with him sometimes.
And he was on
Uh,
stage basically improvising for what, 17, 18 minutes of that?
Probably, yes. And if he wasn't dance improving, he was interpreting what was happening on dance through movement or expression.
Yeah, there was gestural improv beyond just
Right. He
dancing.
was kind of it's funny because I let him be the thread that tied that whole piece together, uh, and I let him do it by making different choices every single time,
Hmm.
which was kind of remarkable. And for the audience to think about the fact that they never got the same. If you were to see that show 10 times, you'd never see the same piece.
And I think that's a part of why people were so wowed by it was that they did have a totally different experience. I mean, my parents came to see the show twice. There are several other people that came to see the show twice. And the response the second night was just as enamored as the first night.
Yep. Yeah, I love that about live theater, and honestly, um, I cannot wait till we can all get back into the theater again and start creating.
Yeah, I miss it tremendously. I miss the process of being in the studio with, you know, 20 other people and making something.
Yes, I agree.
But
Well, soon,
yeah, hopefully the not too distant future, right?
hopefully.
Um, so I've run through most of the questions that I had pre-planned, but let's talk about something in a similar realm that will maybe give a little more context to your usage of improvisation beyond the direct choreographic process.
Mhm.
So, when you're working with, say, students and you're choreographing a solo for a YGP or something like that, what does your process like in terms of getting to know the dancer or the student and moving through toward generating choreography that fits the dancer?
So that's a good question because there's a lot of elements to that. I've pared back the amount of choreography I do for YGP since I've become an artistic director full time. Obviously, my time isn't as open as it was,
Mm-hmm.
but there was one year, I probably 3 years ago, where I did almost 55.
Wow.
And the majority of those works that I create on students are on students that I've never worked with before. And that's a challenge because typically you don't have a ton of time to get to know the dancer or as much time as I would like. So I utilize improv. If it's a dancer that I've never worked with, I utilize improv in that first rehearsal. I will put on varying kinds of music and I will let the dancer move and I will guide them through, like I was explaining, using circles or imagine that you're trudging through the mud, or I need you to create movement that is on the floor, movement that is standing, and movement that is up in the air, and utilize all three of those levels. Um, and I change the directive and I change the music and I tell them to repeat things. Um, and that does two things. One, it allows me to see who is that dancer, how do they interpret movement, what is their instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And two, it breaks that barrier and immediately we become comfortable with each other. Like I said, there's a lot of courage involved, especially for young dancers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're not always that comfortable to improv. Um, but once we break through that and they become comfortable, I think they're more open to receiving information um, from somebody they've never worked with before. So I utilize that a lot. And then typically the outcome of a solo is reflective of their own natural instinct in how they move.
Mm-hmm. So I have the video pulled up. It's the first video we were talking about earlier today
Yeah.
before we started.
Yes, this is Grace. She's somebody that I've worked with several years, and it's amazing also working with students to watch them grow year after year. And her contemporary movement has become beautiful, and she did a wonderful job in the competition. I wish I had seen it, but this is sort of how Grace naturally moves, and what my interpretation of who she is as an artist, I suppose.
So you talked earlier a little bit about how you kind of your style morphs a little bit to the dancer, and they come a little bit into your style as well over the course of the choreographic process.
Right.
So, in a situation like that with a student, how much of that is still occurring?
Well, that depends on the dancer, and that depends on their willingness um, to provide you with information. I believe you have another video of a younger girl, Brooklyn. She she came from a competition dance background, and ballet is sort of relatively new to her, and so she was, for being 12 years old, surprisingly courageous in her movement. She already has spent time discovering who she is as a contemporary dancer. And aside from being very smart, she has an innate sense of movement quality. So, sometimes you run into the challenge of somebody that's never done contemporary dance to get them to understand the simplicity of a head roll,
Mm-hmm.
right? You would have to really go into explaining that. And then other dancers, they just sort of innately get it. Um, Now, the outcome is always different. The ones that I've had to explain and really spoon feed movement to um, still have a beautiful outcome. The process just takes a bit longer and goes in a little bit of a different direction. Uh, Brooklyn, the choreography was able to just kind of fall out because she would absorb it as quick as I could get it out. And some of the material was material I pulled from myself. And other bits of material was material that she could just do. And I kind of threw at her based on what I had seen from her improv, how she interpreted the movement.
So, were there elements from her improv that actually ended up making it into the choreographed piece?
Yes, some because sometimes I find that she would be doing a phrase that I would give her and then kind of fall out of it in a specific way, or move into another way, or she would during her improv do a backflip. And I would say, wonderful, let's put that in the bank and save that backflip for when it's appropriate later.
Yeah.
I think you'll probably see some of her tricks that she has up her sleeve in this video. But she's pretty remarkable for such a young dancer. She's really quite lovely.
So one of the most interesting, you choreographed this at the same time that you were working on Immortal Beloved, yeah?
Yes, I did.
So as we watch that piece, you can see a lot of kind of the directives that you had given Blake, but in a more kind of finite, very directed choreographic way, where you were
So,
actually giving very specific movement for that.
right. So she actually didn't have a lot of improv at all. There was this sort of element of the banging, right? The pounding that
Yeah.
she's doing with the beat. And that's how I started the solo, and that's how I started Blake's solo. And and that was really one of the few directives in that solo that I gave him, where I said, "This is how I want you to start with the rhythm, right? You're hearing it and you're banging and create beyond that, expand, add a foot, add a head, add a." And I sort of said the same thing to her, um, and then we started to move kind of away from that. Um, but yeah, at that moment, it was exactly the same time that I was bringing this stuff to Blake also. Uh, and so I was super inspired by the music and by the idea of this song and putting it into your body, which she did well too. And they're both completely different, which is great. I love that actually using the same piece of music and doing something kind of similar but different to it.
Mm-hmm. Kind of seeing how you can manipulate the different accents in different ways to get a different effect and kind of playing more along those lines.
Right. Well, and how a dancer interprets it.
Mm-hmm. So as you gave kind of that opening, I remember you were a little bit loose with Blake. Was it much more specific for it being a student, or did it still have an element of that freedom to it in that opening?
I was much more specific with her than I was with Blake. Um, this solo was very choreographed. Um, she didn't have a lot of freedom. Um, Now she had freedom to be an artist, but it was very choreographed. With Blake, I gave him almost total freedom, and then I would sit back and watch and kind of give him directives or point out things that I liked or things that I thought he should keep about the way he was interpreting the music.
Mm-hmm. So then, moving away from solo work a little bit into more group work, how do you manage all of those different artistic voices of dancers in a more or less group setting?
Well, it's different with every group because some dancers have worked together for a long time and they're a more cohesive group, and some have not. Um, I generally will start to throw out movement or give some freedom or have a dancer in the room that I really trust and am used to using. Uh, and then try to create something that falls into the realm of looking really nice on all of the dancers, um, and not just the one that I'm using to help, create movement. Um, but you also have to be careful that you're not trying to make artists become the same artist that is the person that's in the center front of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Individuality is important. Uh, I think that when you're doing group work, one of my most favorite things is all of it being in sync, that the dancers have kind of one heartbeat and one breath, and they move together. And of course, with rehearsal, that becomes more and more evolved. Uh, but it's a little bit more of a delicate process with a little bit less freedom, I think.
Mm-hmm. So I have that video pulled up right now of uh, three of the dancers from NWA Ballet Theater at
Yeah.
Faces last year.
Yeah, it's Ava, Bella, and Lily. And this is a piece called Petite Seat. This is a small portion of a 25-minute ballet, and this was the ladies section. And I created this on all of them, um, and I added a lady in every sort of 16 to 8 to 16 counts. Um, and so this is just kind of a small section of that kind of full length work.
So, as what was the process like for creating Petite Seat?
Petite Seat's funny. I actually created it on Kansas City Ballet, second company. Um, and it started off as just a 3.5 minute uh, piece with chairs. And it was supposed to be for outreach. And it's probably the least contrived piece I've ever made because I did it very quickly, without a lot of thought. Um, and uh, and then we began to clean. And the most important thing about Petite Seat was that it was exactly to the music, which is very important. What was very important to me, I really, really cared about musicality for this piece. And then when I got to NWA Ballet Theater, I expanded on it. I went from having 8 dancers to, I think there was a total of 16 when we performed it at our next performance, uh, which was really incredible. There was a men's section and a women's section, and the piece got built onto it. It was like I had a foundation, and then
Mm-hmm.
I would add some framing, and then add some siding, and then add some. It was like I
Yeah,
kept building and building, and then I ended up with this gigantic work. Um, with a lot of dancers that filled a whole half of a program, just from this one kind of simple little idea that I wasn't sure that I was even going to expand upon in the first place.
gotcha. So, what's next for you? What is the next project?
Choreographically,
Yeah.
um, I'm not sure, but I think uh, that the next work that I create, we're at NWA Ballet Theater. We're trying to create some digital content, and I'm really trying to figure out a way that I can throw some choreography out to you guys and have it uh, create this cohesive work, even with everybody being separated, which is a bit challenging, but I always like a challenge. But I'm not sure what my next project is. I think that some good work will come out of this time of quarantine. It's a lot of mixed emotions. It's a lot of chaos,
Hmm.
um,
A lot of misinformation.
misinformation and uncertainty. And, I have a lot of feelings going in a lot of different directions. And that's, always fuel for creating work. I mean, art, as we do dance, as our art, that's our outlet to express, to be representative of our time and where we are, what we're feeling. Um, so I think when this is done, I'm going to create some new stuff. Just not sure what it is yet.
Nothing with masks or gloves, I'd assume. Nothing too on the nose.
I have a sneaky suspicion that plenty of people are going to do that for me.
Yeah, I think I might avoid that one personally.
I don't think so.
So we are actually approaching the hour mark, and we initially said we were gonna shoot for an hour, and then we cut it back to 30 minutes, and now we're actually at the hour point. So I suppose an hour is rather achievable.
It is, yeah, and it's nice to sit and talk. I really look forward to seeing who you begin to talk to next
Yeah,
as the weeks
I'm
pass.
working on lining up choreographers right now, and hopefully, as this progresses, I'll have more or less a scheduled choreographer for each of these, so that maybe we can announce what choreographer is coming up next. So as of right
Yeah,
now, I'm not certain who I'm going to be interviewing a week from now.
sure.
Um, I
Well, it's exciting. I think hearing from different choreographers about processes and different subject matter is really interesting. So
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and it gives me something to focus on and to continue developing myself, both as a choreographer, as a dancer, through gaining greater understanding of different choreographers' processes.
yeah,
So it's been wonderful talking to you, Ryan. I've
yeah,
really enjoyed the conversation.
yeah. Thank you.
I hope everyone that's been listening for the duration enjoyed it. I know we had some echoing issues, and we're kind of troubleshooting a little bit as we went. But I think by the end of it, we got it figured out. So I'd say a pretty successful first run.
Well, good. And there will be a link posted for anyone that missed it. So uh, everybody can feel free to share that link, I guess. And these will remain up on our Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, which is nice.
Fantastic. Well, I will talk to
Yeah,
you in the near future, and I will let you know who I'm having on next when I know.
great. Awesome. Thank you, Leo. Appreciate it.